So this study is going to be covering actually just one verse in Proverbs chapter 11. It's going to be Proverbs chapter 11, verse 1. Now, there's a lot in Proverbs chapter 11, and we, in subsequent studies, are going to be delving further into it. But for right now, and for the purposes of this study, we're only focusing on that one verse because that one verse is talking about our topic for this session. So first of all, let's go ahead and read the verse in Proverbs chapter 11. Okay. All right. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 1. A false balance is an abomination to the Almighty, or to Yahuwah, but a just weight is his delight. Now, that particular thought is in the context of the teaching that the king is giving to his son about how he is to be a just ruler of the nation that he is going to be ruling. As we have said in the past, the Most High always deals with his people through leaders, and it's the leaders chosen by the Most High to do the work of shepherding over his people, guiding his people, setting a standard for his people. That's what the leaders are to do. And when you have good leadership, the nation is going to prosper. So there's that verse that we're going to be looking at. We're going to start with looking at it actually when it's first mentioned. And let's see. I want to make sure we're doing it right. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do is pull up another verse. It's going to be in Deuteronomy, and we'll look at it again in Deuteronomy chapter 25. And it says, "You shall not have in your bag two kinds of weights, a large and a small. You shall not have in your house two kinds of measures, a large and a small." Verse 15, "A full and fair weight you shall have, a full and fair measure you shall have, that your days may be long in the land that Yahuwah your Elohim is giving you. For all who do such things, let me read that again. Verse 16, Deuteronomy chapter 25, "For all who do such things, all who act dishonestly, are an abomination to Yahuwah your Elohim." That's in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 13 through 16. Just a couple of more verses that we want to look at. So now let's look at Ezekiel chapter 45. Ezekiel 45, starting at verse 10. "You shall have just balances and a just ephah and a just bath. The ephah and the bath shall be of one measure, that the bath may contain the 10th part of an omer, the ephah the 10th part of an omer. The measure thereof shall be after the omer. And the shekel shall be 20 gerahs, 20 shekels, 5 and 20 shekels, 15 shekels shall be your manna." Okay. And we're going to talk about what all of those things mean. All right. So there's one other verse that we want to read, but I'm going to wait until we look at the presentation screen first. Okay. So we're good, but again, we've read the key verse. Now, what we've been doing again up to this point is giving from the perspective of Proverbs that the king, which is King David, gave to his sons because they were going to be rulers over the nation of Israel, and they needed to rule justly. So if you remember also the Shema in Deuteronomy chapter 6, starting at verse 4, where it says, Hear, O Israel, Yahuwah, your Elohim, is one Elohim. You shall love him with all your heart, all your mind, and all your might. And you shall teach these things diligently to your children when they rise up, when they lie down, when you walk with them in the way. And you shall also, for yourself, bind them between your eyes. In other words, they would write little pieces of scripture between their eyes. We've talked about that. So basically, the word of the Most High was what was to guide each individual, and certainly that was the case with the king. Well, there's more to it than just the verb. Just the Shema that you put in front of you. What the children were getting on a daily basis is what we're reading. They were getting the Proverbs. Okay, so we would encourage parents on a daily basis, on a regular basis, to use the Proverbs as your way of fulfilling the Shema when it comes to how you pass that culture down to your children. Okay, so now in the nation of Israel, in its beginning stages, that was a physical land. It had physical buildings on it. Well, we're still in captivity, the land of our captivity. Many of us are. So it's not necessarily talking about a structured building, but the building blocks of the Most High are his people. And First Peter talks about that, where we are living stones. Okay, so the Proverbs are actually, if you want to look at it that way, the Proverbs are actually the hallmarks of and the wisdom that go into the building blocks of the temple of the Most High, which is his people. And so really, when we build ourselves up, when we understand what we're made of the teachings of the Proverbs. All right, so that's important because, as Proverbs 29 verse 2 says, which we talked about before, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked bear rule, the people mourn. And certainly we can relate to those things. Okay, so there are several salient points in the 11th chapter of Proverbs, but we're only looking at that first one. Okay, which is dishonest scales are an abomination. So we've read the verses. We'll talk about these others later as we go on. That's Proverbs chapter 12. So let's go back again, and then we're just going to talk a little bit about each one of these verses. So Proverbs chapter 11, we looked at verse 1, we looked at that. So now we'll go back to Deuteronomy. You shall not have in your bag two kinds of weights, a large and a small. You shall not have in your house two kinds of measures, large and small. So let's just get right to the point. The reason these series of instructions are given to the king is to give the king the parameters through which he will lead his people. And the parameters that we're looking at have to do with doing things fairly so that the people from the lowest to the highest, from the smallest to the most well-known, are able to live and prosper and live a life of purpose. And all of those things will be facilitated if you have a just society. King or person in the position of leader, because that's what a king is, it's your job to make sure that that happens. Because as we read in that other scripture in Proverbs 29, if you have the right person in the position of leadership, your society will prosper, and the people in your society will be joyful. They will be full of joy. Can you imagine living in a society where the people actually have joy? They get up every morning with a joyful heart. Now, in the Most High's kingdom, which is in us, that should be the case with all of his children, even though we may be living in a world that is corrupt and evil. But if we're living from the inside out, this should be our standard state of affairs. But please understand that when the nation of Israel was operating in the blessing of the Most High, which meant that they had leadership following the very laws, commandments, statutes that the Most High had given to them so that they could be effective leaders in their nation and to lead the nation. When they were moving in his blessing, not only were their houses blessed, but the people around them in the surrounding cities and in the highways and the byways were all blessed as well, because they set the tone for the society. And so it has to be the king who is definitely having just weights and measures. Now, this is talking about economics. That's why we're spending some time looking at these scriptures, because a true kingdom is going to be a kingdom that's focused on all aspects of life, with a focal point being the spiritual essence of the kingdom. The spiritual essence of the kingdom is the word of the Most High. What we just read is the word of the Most High. Economics is a spiritual thing. It's not a material thing. It's a spiritual thing that's manifested in material ways. So it can either manifest correctly or it can manifest wickedly. Okay, so the economics of the kingdom of heaven requires that the king treat people justly and with the respect that they are due. So in order to do that, the standard of measurement has been given to us by our heavenly Father. He's the one that said what a ephah was going to be. He's the one that said what a denarius would actually represent. Now we use those materials, and unfortunately, for thousands of years, they have been being misused. I'm sorry. They have been misused. And that causes a society to be the opposite of a joyful society. It causes a society to be one that's always in mourning. Does this sound familiar? Okay. Well, we keep missing the fundamental reason for our discomfort as we try as best we can to eke out a living in this particular society. This particular society is being led by people who use two different kinds of weights. They have a weight that they use for each other. It's a very small group of people, by the way. They have a weight that they use for each other, and they have a weight that they use for a larger group of people, which is smaller. And then they even have a smaller weight that they use for us, the despised of this nation. But the us that I'm referring to are Yasharel. We are those children of the book that are being misused. Now, that does not, however, negate how we got to be in this position. All the Father did was speak to us through the prophets as to what was going to happen to us should we choose to obey him and should we choose not to obey him. Okay, so if we chose not to obey him, that put us in directly in the line of fire of our enemies who have never used the same kinds of weights. They've always looked out for their own selves before anyone else. It's just that the world is not supposed to be run by that spirit. And right now it is being run by that spirit. This nation was created with that spirit. I'm going to say that again because we're at a time now where things must be declared for what they are. The nation that we currently live in began with two kinds of weights. One kind of weight for the ruling class and another kind of weight for those that they are ruling over. So the very things that the so-called founding fathers of this country were supposed to have been venerated for being, I'm not even going to say this, what kind of country this was, whether it's a Christian nation or not. It doesn't really matter what you say you are. It's a matter of what your policies and what your actions dictate that you have done with the word of the Most High. So it's the word of the Most High that told these landowners that started and these corporations that started this country, okay, you're using words from my book. Okay, well, part of those words is you treat people fairly. But it was that group of people using these two different kinds of weights. Those are the people that were in a position of leadership then. Those are the same people that are in position of leadership now. It's the same spirit. Okay, so because my people have been the ones with the small weight, we know that the weights are not balanced because that's the life that we have been given. Okay. So when we see that the king, the people in positions of leadership are not supposed to do that, then we know that this nation has not founded itself on biblical principles because the principle is right there in Deuteronomy 25. Okay, so let's look at another one. Well, yeah, we'll go ahead and look at it. But I don't want to focus on the ruling class. I want us to be able to see how it got to this place where we're actually underneath the authority of these ruling classes. And that gets back to what my people, the people of the book, the people that the book was written by, the people that the book was written through to bless the rest of the world, the people of the book in Ezekiel chapter 45 were told, well, actually, even well before Ezekiel chapter 45, in the very beginning of Ezekiel, the people of the book were told, you are not living right. Your leaders are not living right. You are an idolatrous nation. You have tried to make yourselves into the same kinds of nations that are all around you when you're supposed to be a light to those people. They have made you dark. And because of your desire to walk after what they're doing rather than what I'm doing, I am going to send judgment on you by those very nations that you think so much of. And they are going to persecute you. They are going to enslave you. They are going to make you a byword. They are going to make you miserable. When you wake up, you're going to wish that it was still night. When it's time to go to sleep, you're going to wish that it was time to wake up. You're going to be miserable. And the reason that you're going to be miserable is because all of these things that I have given you to do, you have chosen not to do. And the leaders are at the head of the line in disobedience. Now the leaders that are being talked about are the ancestors of the current nation of Yasharel. Okay. And that's who Ezekiel was speaking to. So he was telling them in chapter 45, all right, you're going to be sent into captivity. That's going to last for a certain amount of time. And then I'm going to let you come back into the land. But when you come back into the land, you come back different than when you left. You come back wanting to follow me and then following me and doing the things that I've given you to do. That's the coming back and rebuilding of the temple, the altar, the society, all of those things. And part of that rebuilding is still the economic base of the society, which is based on equity and fairness, two words that are anathema to this society. Okay. As a matter of fact, they're bad words. They're words that have been described as leftist. Okay. Even though the scriptures plainly say that that's the kind of society that real leaders will facilitate. So when you go back into the land, Israel, Yasharel, in Ezekiel 45, verse 11, your bath and your ephah have to be the same. Okay. And that's what Ezekiel 45 is talking about. So this is toward the end of his prophecy when he's saying, okay, y'all messed up. You've been in captivity. I'm going to let you come back. And when you come back, here's how I want you to operate in your society. And when those who know what the word says see what the Father was instructing, they realize, wow, he's telling us to just go back and do what we should have been doing in the first place. And so that's why it's so important that we understand we need both the so-called Old and the so-called New Testaments, because the Most High's word has not changed, and his expectations of his people have not changed. Okay, so now, true enough, those three that we just looked at are all what we call Old Testament, or what y'all call Old Testament scriptures, because what the Most High wants us to see is his Bible is a compilation of the totality of his word. Okay, all of it is needed. So even if you're just saying, okay, well, there are 66 books, X number in the Old Testament, X number in the New Testament, there are some people that say we only want the Old Testament. There are some other people who say no, we're only we're New Testament Christians. So and never the twain shall meet. Well, the fact of the matter is the Most High wrote all that. Okay, that's why we keep bringing up 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 16. 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 16 was written in what we call the New Testament, and it was talking about Old Testament. So both of them are the same because they are all inclusive of the will of the Most High. It's just that in what we call the New Testament, we're understanding better what that will is, and that will has to be on the inside of us and not just in some written down rules and regulations. But when it comes to how our society should live, how we should live as an individual or family or community, it's the word that gives us that. And the word has something for us when it comes down to economics. You treat people across the board with the same measuring, the same metric. That's how it works in a nation that is healthy and is full of life. Okay, so now if we were to look at this in the New Testament, we will see it, but we'll see it from the perspective actually of one of the judgments that is on the world because of having not handled the word of the Most High correctly. This is we're in Revelation chapter 6, and Revelation chapter 6 begins with the 7 seals. Okay, this is when the Lamb that we all know as Yeshua, Jesus Christ in English, we all know as Yeshua, the Lamb that was slain, is standing in heaven. John sees him. He cries because there's this book that's held up, and he's asked the question, who can open the seals of this book? And John cries because nobody in heaven and earth can open the seals of that book except for the Lamb. So now the Lamb has got the book, the scroll, if you will. And what's inside the scroll? What's inside the scroll is judgment. Okay, so we're looking at the beginning of judgment, and now we'll do a review, maybe, or even a additional study on what we can glean from the Revelation. But I'm only going to focus on verse 6, which is the third seal. Okay, so we're not going to talk about any of the seals, but the third seal, because this is the seal when it comes to judgment that has to do with this pair of scales. It says in verse 5 of Revelation 6, when he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, come. And I looked, and behold, a black horse. If you remember in bookkeeping and in finance, to be in the black is a good thing, okay? Because that has to do with balancing out the accounts, okay? So once your account is balanced out, if you're in the black, that means you don't owe anybody, okay? All right. So this black horse represents the accounts being balanced. So this has to do with the economic system. That's why we're bringing it up. Now, it says, when he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, come. And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. Okay, so this rider is the rider that's going to set things right. That's why in this particular passage, this is one of the judgments, because that's what the rider is coming to do. The rider is coming to balance the scales in accordance with the Most High's will, rather than the satanic will that has had its thumb on the scales for thousands of years. Okay, and this country is no exception. And so in verse 6, it says, and I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. Do not harm the oil and wine. That's the state of the world that this rider on the black horse is coming into. What does that world look like? When it says a quart of wheat for a denarius, that means that it took a day's worth of wages to pay for a loaf of bread, for one loaf of bread. That's what this is about. So in other words, the people were underneath severe economic pressure. And then it says, and do not harm the oil and wine, which meant also that there were other people who were controlling those scales with their thumb on it, that were living in luxury. The reason they could live in luxury is because they had other people's things that didn't belong to them fairly. They took them because they were in positions to be able to take them. And so now we'll talk about what that looked like, let's say in 1870. Okay. In 1860, in the South and in other parts of the country too, by the way, but the South is the epicenter, for the ruler class, the landowners, those who had created this economy that was based on exploiting capital and individuals and souls of men to produce an economic system that had some weighted heavier than others. So they were the ones with the heavier weight, and therefore the resources of those who had less weight accrued to them. In 1860, the people working the land that they were making the money from, whether it was cotton, whether it was tobacco, whether it was sugar cane, whatever the commodity was, part of the commodity was the souls of the people who were working the land to produce those things. Okay. And then working those things into something that could be then sold on the market. So this settler colony, that's how it was established. And these same people had Bibles. Those same people already understood the concept of weights and measures. That's why they were giving themselves more weight. Okay, so that was the scenario in 1860. The souls that were doing the work, basically they were getting 100% for 0% of their effort. They were getting 100% profit for 0% of their effort. Once 1870 rolled around, they could no longer consider human beings as property, or at least not legally. All right. So what ended up happening was the human beings that used to work for free now had to be paid. But the system that was set up was a system of, before, they would have land for these people to stay on while they worked the land. Now the people could stay on that land, but they had to pay the landowner for being able to stay there while they worked on the crop that belonged to the landowner. So they basically were paying the landowner for the same thing that the landowner was getting for free. So in essence, they were being moved back into slavery. And that system worked so well that it was used also in the North. All right. So that's why you have towns that were created, whether they be mining towns or even manufacturing towns, where the people were given houses to live in that were actually owned by the corporations that they worked for. And if you remember, Ernie Ford had a song, 16 Tons. And what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't call me, because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. That was the reality in 1870 for my people. That reality is what we're still struggling with today, because the children of those who were the landowners are still here. They're running the Congress right now as we speak. Nothing has changed spiritually, and the dynamic of this idea of just weights and balances is still here. Now, the reason why we're looking at Revelation chapter 6 is because when this rider of this black horse begins to ride, he's going to change that. Okay. And that's why it is appropriate for the Most High's people to cry out to him. You don't cry out to your oppressor because they're doing what they've always done. You cry out to he who has control over your oppressor. And that's the Most High. When he comes, he's coming to set the scales right, which means that all of that we have put in and has been unfairly taken from us is going to be given back to us sevenfold. That's what's getting ready to happen. And those who are in control now know that, which is why things are the way that they are. So that's why we wanted to spend some time looking at these scriptures, because see, the scriptures were telling us these things thousands of years ago. They were telling us about our lived experiences in 2022. This Bible that we set S-E-T, in a corner and glance over at every once in a while has the words to our not only liberation, it has the reason why we need to be liberated. Okay, now all of this is a result of sin. There's no question about that. And there's also no question about it, the fact that the reason why it's happening to the people that I come from is because of things that we did or didn't do when he first gave us this blessing. All right. The blessing is going to return, but we must understand why it happened. And as we end this lesson, let me explain to you why we're the people. There has to be a people having already gone through hell that have the understanding of what heaven really can be and is going to be. If you are in the class of people who has been distributing hell to other people, there's no way you can be in charge of this next iteration that is about to be ushered in. The first has to become last, and the last will become first. All right. So that's what is going on. We know how to be compassionate because compassion has not been shown to us. We know how to live economically where everybody can have what they need because everybody is treated with the same dignity and respect and equity as everyone else. We know how to do that because it has not been done to us. But we also know this was what we had to go through because we wanted to be like everyone else. So all of the nations that were around and surrounding Israel, we ended up being overcome by those nations and being captive in those nations. This is not the only place where the Most High's people are. We're in all four corners of the world, but he's about to gather his people. That's why we're in a period of what we would call an awakening. Okay. But when you look up the word awakening in the context of these studies, as Ephesians 6 says, awake you that sleep and rise from the dead. We're dead and we've been living or existing in a state of death. So we know what death is like. But the Most High wants us to know what life is like. And that's where the relationship with Yeshua is preeminent because he's the one that is the door to life. He is the one that has the life. He is that life. He is the way to that life. And all we have to do is come through him to receive what the Most High had for his people all along. But as he is ready to return, and so when we look at Revelation, what we're actually looking at is the beginning of that story and how it's going to play itself out, which is why it would be appropriate for us to spend a little bit more time in Revelation as well, because the time since we looked at Revelation and this particular point in time, there's so many things that have happened that now make Revelation even more relevant than it was when we looked at it. But the idea of Revelation is, behold, I come quickly. Okay, so Yeshua is on his way back. If you are awake, it's time to see how you can be a living stone and how you can teach your children to be a living stone, because the Father's still only going to work through leaders. He's only going to work through leaders. When it comes to the concept of a nation, okay? Now, but even in your family, he's only going to work through those who are in position of leading the family. As we close, let me tell you in a practical sense what that means. Your children are not supposed to be running your household. That's out of order according to the scriptures. You are supposed to be giving them what they are supposed to understand, what they're supposed to know, what they're supposed to think, what they're supposed to do. So, if nothing else, see yourself as that leader that the Most High has chosen. If you have children, that the Most High has chosen, and be that, which means that the words have to be in you so that you can be that living stone. And so that's where we'll stop the lesson for this session. The Father bless you and keep you. The Father make his face to shine upon you. The Father lift up his countenance upon you and give you his shalom.